I keep hearing from those cable stations and TV networks that, well, neither you nor I watch anymore, that political violence is on the rise in this country. And of course, it's, people who are like you and me and think conservatively and vote conservatively. We're the real problem here. We're the violent criminals who are manifesting our political beliefs into blood in the streets. That's what I keep hearing. But is that the case? Really? John Lott is the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, author of More Guns, Less Crime. And unlike many of the people that you're seeing on cable news, he actually does the research, crunches the numbers, and just comes up with a result. John, thank you for joining us this evening. Good to see you.
Well, thanks for having me on. Congratulations on your program.
Thank you. Let's focus on what I find to be one of the most outrageous pieces of criminal negligence from the Justice Department. The fact that these attacks on pregnancy crisis centers continue. These are pro-life organizations that try to help women who are pregnant find an alternate choice other than abortion. They're getting firebombed. They're getting vandalized. The proprietors of these organizations are being threatened, and there's not been one arrest. Have you been able to analyze the data of this criminal activity and what it shows you?
Right. Well, we looked at all the attacks at both pro-life and pro-choice venues and people since the beginning of May, when the Dobbs decision was initially leaked, and it's amazing. You find over 22 times more news stories, local news stories, not national news stories, but local news stories about attacks against pro-life people or organizations than you see attacks against pro-choice type places. And the Department of Justice keeps a list themselves of attacks on pro-choice organizations, but they don't even keep a list, let alone deal with it in terms of prosecutions of pro-life people or organizations. And it's one of the more amazing things to me too is the pro-choice groups, when they put out a study, it gets massive news coverage on attacks, but they don't release the underlying data that's there.
Right.
And so we decided to go and try to put this together ourselves. We contacted many pro-choice groups to say, okay, well, you have reports on this. Could you give us your underlying list of cases? And they just would acknowledge that they got the emails or telephone calls from us and then never respond.
Right.
I talked to some reporters. They didn't even think of asking for the underlying list.
Right.
The reporters that did. Because the amazing thing, I mean, you deal with reporters a lot, you would think they'd want some current examples when they put in this story about the number of so-called attacks that are occurring.
Well, I mean, this fits into the narrative. I mean, the reporters already have a predisposition to agree that there's violent intimidation of people trying to go get their abortion or work in an abortion clinic. So it just, since it fits the narrative, why bother researching and getting the underlying data? I want to drill down on something here because you're talking about attacks on pro-choice or abortion clinics. Does this include people who just sit outside these clinics and pray or maybe stand in the way of the door to try to prevent people from going inside? Is that considered a violent attack?
No, I mean, what's considered a violent attack would be if somebody put super glue in the locks or something like that. Those are the types of things the Department of Justice has been including. In fact, that's pretty much most of the ones that the Department of Justice has.
So super glue in the locks of an abortion clinic is a violent attack, and the Justice Department is keeping track of that. But a pregnancy crisis center that gets firebombed and vandalized and the windows broken and threats spray painted on the side of the wall, that doesn't show up on the radar of the DOJ.
Right. No, exactly. It's, they basically bring the whole legal force of the federal government down on people who do the types of super glue that I was just. But it's more than just the abortion stuff. We've been keeping track of things like the types of people who engage in mass public shootings and other types of crimes like that. And the Biden administration wants to make it seem like most of these attacks are by white supremacists. The media does that all the time. I'm not sure these people actually read through the manifestos of these killers. You take the Buffalo mass murderer earlier this year in Buffalo, New York. If you read his manifesto, he was a racist, but he was a racist because he was an environmentalist. He was upset that minorities had too many kids. He described himself as a socialist. He described himself as an eco-fascist. I don't know, maybe all your conservative friends classify themselves as socialists and eco-fascists. But, you kind of wonder, simply because the person is, and look at the El Paso mass murderer or the guy in Ohio, very similar write-ups that they had in their manifestos. It's kind of like, if the person's a racist, then they must be right-wing.
Yeah, which is disgusting, of course. I mean, here's the thing. All of those things you just listed, socialist, eco-fascist, against people having a lot of babies, and racist, that is literally the opposite of every conservative value and principle of anyone who's a conservative, regardless of race. But you're right, that there is this built-in narrative that, oh, well, this person said racial things or racist things, so therefore they're conservative, which makes no sense unless, you've listened to some, hip-hop gangster rap songs recently and heard some of the racism that comes out of those artists' voices, and most of them are voting Democrats. So this is a problem with the media, certainly, John Lott, but I'm more concerned, frankly, that the Justice Department is buying into this and actually instigating this.
Right. Well, there have been whistleblower complaints from some FBI agents saying that they're being forced to look into more possible white supremacist type cases than they can find. And so they're just wasting a lot of time just trying to find something that they can't see occurring. But it has a real impact on people's safety. If you're wasting federal resources on things where there's not a problem and ignoring cases where there are real problems. I mean,
so the number of attacks on pro-life, and this is all based on contemporary reporting that you've seen that has, made the news, especially in local news stations. The number of attacks on a pro-life pregnancy crisis center versus the number of attacks that on an abortion clinic, despite the headlines, that you'll see where, an abortion provider fears for their life every day when they go to work.
Right.
What is it? Do you have data here in terms of the ratio of the actual crimes?
Yeah. Look, nobody needs to take our word for it. We have a list of the news stories as well as links to the news stories on our website at crimeresearch.org. It's right there at the top. And what you find is that since the beginning of May through the end of September, there were 135 attacks against pro-life people or organizations. Over that whole period of time, there were six attacks involving pro-choice people or organizations. So that's over a 22-to-1 ratio. But it's probably even more lopsided than that for the very reason that we've been talking about. I'm depending upon news stories. And so if the media itself is more interested in attacks against pro-choice than they are interested in covering attacks against pro-life, it could be even much higher than that.
Yeah, and I very much recommend you go to the Crime Prevention Research Center and take a look at all of the analysis that they do about crime in this country. In our final 30 seconds here, John, crime is looming large for these midterm elections here. But we're told by Governor Hochul in New York and other Democrats that, but Barack Obama said it the other day, violent crime is actually up in red states more than blue states. Do you have anything to add to that narrative?
Well, I think people know that basically what's happened is that there have been Democrat-controlled cities in those states. Crime is a local issue. Police are local people. Local judges, which make decisions on sentencing, are elected locally. And so, unless you want the state to take over the police department that's there or replace the locally elected judges, it's a local issue. And if Democrats control New Orleans or other places, Memphis or, Nashville or other places like that, you're going to have this type of problem.
Yeah, it's the cities run by Democrats, not the states run by a Republican. Thanks, John. Got to leave it there. John Lott, Crime Prevention Research Center. More to come on O'Connor Tonight.